We are Bit Brigade from Athens, Georgia. How are you tonight?
Bit Brigade is a 5-piece band. We've got 2 guitars, bass drums, and a gamer, Noah here. He sits on stage with us and does a full playthrough of a classic NES title from, like, you know, beginning to credits. And while he's doing that live on stage projected behind us, everyone else in the band is playing all the music to the video game in real time, synced up to his speedrun.
Basically, it all began from just us friends hanging out. It was a pun. It was originally, the first game we ever played was a video game called Contra on Nintendo. And just the silly thing came up, what if we played the music to Contra during the game and called it Contraband? And it just snowballed after that. We ended up practicing that, performing, and then just doing different games, and it just kind of kept building.
For the time being, we're trying to keep everything to classic NES, mostly because the sound files, the format is really conducive to a 4-piece rock band, because you've got 2 square waves, which are like 2 guitars, triangle wave, which is like bass, which is me, and then you've got a noise channel and a PCM channel, which are sound effects and percussive noises, so that's drums right there. So if you go beyond classic Nintendo sound formats, you start getting more voices and more deeper melodic arrangements. And so classic NES is way more well suited to what we do, but we definitely are open to, after we exhaust all of our possibilities currently, jumping up to, 16-bit systems and stuff like that. You know, there might come the day where we have to do Super Nintendo, but right now we're not out of NES ideas yet. Adapting the soundtracks is difficult for both sides of the equation, because the musicians, we have to learn everything and kind of squeeze it into the game, and then Noah's got to build a run around the way that we want to perform the soundtrack, so there's a little bit of a give and take. He has a lot more to say on that.
Yeah, some of the games are more difficult than others. There are games like Mega Man that are pretty straightforward. You just do one stage and the next stage, and all those stages have their own particular songs, so it's really easy for us to put that together. But there's other games like Zelda, which we're currently taking on tour, which we do the original game and it only has a few songs, just like a handful of songs. So we actually bring in songs from 4 or 5 different Zelda games that have come out over the years. Some of them are more difficult to write because they are Super Nintendo songs, like we were saying, so there's multiple voices and they have to kind of like condense them down.
You have to pick and choose between 8 different instruments. How many can you play at once on one instrument and try and get all of those melodic nuances into the song?
And also with Zelda, I had to spend a lot of time, obviously, building the run because I have to beat it in about 40 minutes. And so after I built the run, I sat down with a guitarist in the band, Bryant, and we actually timed each little area and figured out what songs we thought could fit for each of these sections. And then I had to actually go through and rearrange my run to fit the songs, because the songs were like, well, if one song was just 1.5 minutes, then I would try to shorten this one section and extend a different section. So there's a lot of little subtleties in that take a good amount of time for us to piece together. I get really nervous beforehand. Yeah, no, it's all on my shoulders. If I screw up one too many times, it's game over, man.
He doesn't eat, he doesn't drink.
Yeah,
he just lays in the back and just prays that everything will be fine.
Yeah, basically I find it best to take a nap before a show. The hardest game, we used to do the video game Castlevania 3. And it was, for me, by far the most difficult. There's just so many little things that can go wrong that can completely screw over my entire run. Some of the games like Zelda are actually, even though there's a lot more thought involved in what I'm doing, sometimes I'm counting enemies or trying to figure out if I have enough money to purchase an item or something like that, isn't quite so difficult as Castlevania, where I can just instantly die. It's just like fall down a pit or get hit into something or lose a weapon on accident, and it's over.
Memorization versus reaction time. But there have been ones that we've really wanted to do that haven't worked out. I would love to do Marble Madness, but in order to beat Marble Madness, Noah has to go through it so fast that we wouldn't be able to complete the full like repetition of one,
many
like,
of the
one
songs,
song. Maybe just cut off
yeah.
if they were even done, like before they even loop or anything. What are some other ones that wouldn't work?
We've always talked about doing a game, Blaster Master, which is has a great soundtrack, is really fun, but it's just too long and there's not enough songs for it. So, and it doesn't have enough other games. Like Zelda has a lot of different games, so we're able to grab songs from Zelda 2 and A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening and things like that.
We can patch all the boring spots
flesh
with
out
other
the
stuff.
soundtrack, but Blaster Master unfortunately doesn't really have that.
There's a lot that people really want us to do they don't realize would be miserable. Everyone wants us to do Battletoads, and you only really like the first 2 songs off of Battletoads, and then it gets really boring towards the end. A lot of long ones that people are like, hey, do this 3-hour RPG.
Play Final Fantasy.
Yeah, exactly.
That
doesn't sound
work.
fun for anybody. Yeah. Well, at the conclusion of this tour, we got 2 more in the works right now for later this summer, one in July and one in August, I believe. Or maybe a little bit later, maybe one in July, one in December, something like that. But we're going out again in July. And we're going to be hopefully putting our Metroid album out on vinyl very soon. We've got 2 other soundtracks that we are trying to actively record right now to hopefully have released later in the year.
I definitely grew up playing lots of video games. That was my childhood. The one thing that was like always an anchor point. I could always come back and play single-player video games that my brother wasn't really interested in, so I would just hang out and do that. A lot of the games that we've played, I would say, are some of my favorite soundtracks. Zelda and Metroid and Mega Man and Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden. Just really intricate. It's interesting because I didn't realize at the time when I was a kid these songs were kind of laying the seeds for what I found interesting in music later on in life, and that's some of the reasons that I became friends with Luke and some of these other guys, is that they were playing this really complicated music that really harkened back to these songs that were on Nintendo. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the music that we started gravitating towards as we came of age after playing video games in our youth had a lot in common with video game music in general, because the NES titles, like I had spoken earlier about how they're kind of condensed to a very few number of voices, that meant that they were very melodically dense because you couldn't pack in atmosphere. You couldn't have like just a single cello note going for 5 minutes to produce this sense of dread. You had to pack all this melody into 4 different voices just to keep it interesting. So we kind of got addicted to overcomplicated music at a young age. So we all started playing math rock and really melodic metal and stuff like that. And so that really influenced what we did. And so making the leap to doing video game music just kind of felt natural. You know, you sit down and you're like, well, I haven't listened to the Ninja Gaiden soundtrack in 10 years. And you put it on and you're like, oh, I accidentally used a part of this in a riff that I wrote once from a math rock band. I didn't even realize it because it's so deeply ingrained in your head. You know, you've heard it so long, and it really it's one of the building blocks of you musically.